Dun 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 dun. Dun dun dun. Hey everybody, welcome to TPIM SR Live. I'm your host. True power is mine. Today's date, January 22nd, 2020, the year of our Lord. I'm doing this show specifically for the uninitiated, the newcomer, to let you know what to expect. Now, you already see the pandemic rising in the east. You already see the false flags gathering in the middle east. But I really want you to understand human capacity for evil. Human brother Marty, welcome to the show. Peace and power, brother. The human capacity for debauchery. Carol City, good morning, brother. Peace and power to you. Welcome to the show. This clip was sent to me by a confidential informant. American Aboriginal, peace and power. Yes, the China germ warfare. And we'll probably touch on that towards the end of today's broadcast. Human nature, unfortunately, my friends, is human nature.
In the middle of the Ob River in Siberia lies a forgotten island. Never officially named, it's known after the nearest village, the hamlet of Nazino. But people who live in this desolate region know the island has another secret name, a name you will never find on Google Maps. Over 70 years ago, dark things happened on this strip of earth surrounded by icy waters, things so horrifying that they were kept hidden for decades, things that resulted in this nameless place becoming known as Cannibal Island. An anonymous piece of marshland less than 600 meters wide, Cannibal Island spent the best part of human history in total obscurity. Then, in 1933, it was abruptly chosen to be the site of a new kind of gulag, an agricultural prison where inmates would work the land for the glory of the Soviet Union. But instead of a pastoral utopia, the 6,000 political prisoners sent there found themselves trapped in a nightmare of starvation with only one gruesome way to survive. In today's video, we're traveling into the heart of human darkness and uncovering the horrors of Joseph Stalin's worst gulag. It was a spring night in 1933 when Theophila Bailina's parents received their visitor. She walked with fragile, painful movements, her legs wrapped in filthy rags. Although she said she was 40, she looked almost twice that age. Young Theophila, it was likely the first time she'd ever seen a political prisoner. Theophila's
I want to kind of jump over this part because, yeah, it just basically talks about cannibalism and things of that nature. I'm not trying to gross no one out. You see the way that this thing always works. Sister Barbara, welcome to the show. And Barbara Gordon, welcome to the show. Peace and power. You see the way this thing often works out. It starts off with the police.
folks, my point
The police unstableage, and now it just totally disappears. I don't even know what's going on. I'm trying to do this here, and
folks, my point is
let's continue.
The woman had come from the new gulag on the Ob River, known as Cannibal Island, the latest atrocity Stalin's Soviet Union had perpetrated against its own people. But the story of Nazino Island, sometimes rendered Nazinski, doesn't start with Theophila or with that cold May night in 1933. It started nearly 4 years earlier, 3,000 kilometers away, in a city Fia had only seen in her dreams. In the winter of 1929, Joseph Stalin had sat in the Kremlin pondering his latest decrees. It was now 5 years since Vladimir Lenin had died, nearly a year since Leon Trotsky was sent into exile, and 12 whole years since the Bolshevik Revolution overthrew the Tsar. With a flick of his pen, Stalin was about to open a new bloody chapter in Soviet history. He called it collectivization. Collectivization was the order that all peasants in areas such as Ukraine give up their small holdings and go work on Soviet collective farms. This was Stalin's anemic carrot. The gigantic stick was dekulakization, a euphemism for liquidating the kulaks. Technically, kulaks were wealthier peasants. In practice, though, kulaks were any peasants who disagreed with collectivization. And boy, did plenty of people. In Ukraine, peasants destroyed their tools, slaughtered their animals, and burned their crops rather than letting them fall into Soviet hands. So Stalin did what Stalin did best. He had everyone who defied him shot and sent everyone else to the gulags. By 1932, collectivization had led to famine across the USSR and a gulag system so overcrowded that even Stalin realized he just couldn't keep shoving more people into them. What the Soviet dictator needed was someone who could think outside of the box, someone who could devise a brand new method of dekulakization. Luckily for Stalin, and unluckily for everybody else, the Soviets already had exactly that sort of man. On March the 11th, 1933, Genrikh Yagoda hit upon an idea that was almost brilliant in its cynicism. A future head of the NKVD, Yagoda is mostly famous today for being just one in a long line of people Stalin promoted to the top job, then got bored with and had shot. In 1933, though, he was part of the team overseeing the utter mess that was collectivization, tasked with making Stalin's decrees somehow work without starving everybody to death. So Yagoda hit upon an ingenious solution. The USSR needed to set up collective farms while also punishing kulaks. Well, then why not condemn those kulaks to work on collective farms? Easy. Yagoda's plan was to resettle 2 million dissidents in Siberia, give them tools, to make them build their own sustaining farms. All these new farms would solve the collectivization famine, while the miserable Siberian weather would provide the punishment part of it. Yagoda was so pleased with his idea that he started implementing it even before Stalin agreed, sending out quotas of kulaks for police forces to arrest. And it's at this point that everything descended into a terrifying farce. In Stalin's police, failing to fulfill your quota meant becoming part of someone else's quota. So you were extremely incentivized to find dissidents, even where no dissidents existed. That meant if you were living in an urban area with few kulaks, you went after those failing the internal passport regime instead. A hated feature of Tsarist Russia, internal passports had been ditched by the Bolsheviks after they gained power, but Stalin had revived the system the previous December. Distributed only to those doing useful work, internal passports effectively made you a legal citizen. Failed to carry one, and you were automatically a criminal. And in the cities, there were always enough people without passports to fulfill police quotas. Kuzma Salnikov, for example, was a married miner from Novokuznetsk and a passionate communist. Then, one day, he happened to go to a market without his internal passport, just as the police sealed off the building. He was deported from his home city without even a chance to inform his wife. He never saw her or his 2 kids again. Awful as Salnikov's story is, it's just one of a great many. There was the 12-year-old girl on a station platform for 10 minutes while her mother went to buy bread. When the mother returned, her child was gone, abducted by policemen trying to hit their quota. There was the 103-year-old man who went out on his street for some air, or the student who was snatched off his aunt's doorstep in Moscow. There was even a pregnant woman deported for not carrying her passport, despite having it clutched in her hands the entire time. All across the USSR, hundreds of thousands disappeared in this way. As their families struggled to find out what was happening, Yagoda's goons loaded those captured onto trains bound for the wilds of Siberia. Vagrants, common criminals, political prisoners, kulaks, and ordinary people were abducted off the street, and they all became part of this unwilling exodus into Russia's frozen interior. The conditions were so bad that scores of these people just died en route. But they were really the lucky ones. The survivors didn't know it, but they were being funneled toward hell itself. Given the immense cruelties it inflicted, it can be tempting to think of the Soviet system as an infernal machine fine-tuned for repression. But that wasn't the case. In Siberia, officials weren't even informed of the thousands of prisoners headed their way until the first trains appeared. When 25,000 people were unloaded in Tomsk in April 1933, local party bosses were basically like, well, what the hell do we do now? The trouble was that Yagoda's guys in Moscow had implemented the repression orders lightning fast, but then let all the logistics get bogged down in bureaucracy. In crude terms, this is a little bit like the Fire Festival guy putting all the advertising in place for a massive party in the Bahamas, but failing to supply any food or staff or tents. Except in this analogy, the Bahamas are a snowbound Siberian wilderness, the missing tents are unbuilt prison compounds, and everyone is super terrified that cancelling the festival will result in Stalin holding a rival one festival called mass executing all my Siberian officials. By May 1933, Tomsk was housing nearly 90,000 prisoners, but had yet to receive a kopeck for caring for them. So officials finally decided someone else was going to have to deal with the problem. Loading the first 5,000 exiles and 50 guards onto lumber barges, they set them off along the Ob River, bound for the new island settlement near Nazino village. It was not a pleasant ride. Nazino was roughly 800 kilometers away, 800 kilometers along a river still choked with ice, in a part of Siberia ravaged by snowstorms.
But you have to remember this, friends. All this is coming to be because of the fact that they're using the police force to round up people. And then they funneled these people into the system, drive them to the island. Now, this is the Russian version. Don't forget, there's been a Chinese version. There's been a Cambodian version. There was a German version. Then traditionally, using various systems of colonization, there was a English version, a Dutch version, a Spanish version, a French version, an Italian version, a Greek version. I mean, it just keeps on going on. It's in human nature, this capacity for cruelty. And I want to ask you all, just think if those folks back then had the technology we have today, because the spirit that made those people, the people that was able to do such wicked things to other human beings, is still alive in men and women walking the earth right now. Let's continue. Hopefully the uninitiated is getting what you need.
By the time the barges reached what would become Cannibal Island on May the 18th, 27 settlers had already died of exposure. The survivors, meanwhile, stepped into a nightmare. The island was a low-lying swampland, some 3 kilometers long and barely 600 meters wide. There was no shelter, just trees that the settlers were meant to cut down and use to build huts. But the officials in Tomsk had forgotten to give them any tools. And now, here they were, standing on a blanket of snow as night set in, with no way of getting lumber to build shelter. Left with no choice, the prisoners slept out in the open in the driving snow. By the time May the 19th, 1933 dawned, another 295 were dead. And so, a fight for survival that would make the Hunger Games look like the very lovely games began.
Thank you for your consideration.
Almost all of the souls who were sent to Cannibal Island were city dwellers who'd been caught without their passports. They had none of the agricultural skills real Kulaks would have had, none of the survival skills necessary. And this would soon become a very serious problem. Barges the prisoners in a lump of bread each day to keep them alive. But now the guards could no longer be bothered to turn the flour they brought with them into bread. Instead, they simply handed each prisoner 200 grams of flour as sustenance, less food than even prisoners in Auschwitz or Cambodia's killing fields got to live on. Already desperate, many of the settlers mixed the flour with dirty river water, leading to an outbreak of dysentery. It was only the second day, and already Cannibal Island was a horror show. And if all of this is already just a bit too much for you, it's probably best you turn off the video now, because from here on in, things are only going to get worse. By May 22nd, 4 days after the barges arrived, the prisoners had reached new depths of suffering. The freezing rains were killing people nightly, while those who'd managed to build fires were lying too close to them and they burned to death. On top of that, the guards hadn't returned to give out more flour since the meager 200 grams everyone had received on the first day. At this stage, the prisoners were still just about clinging to enough of their humanity to organize a protest. They started a riot. They made enough noise that the guards eventually sailed on the boats over from the opposite bank to see what was going on. When the prisoners said they wanted food, the guards agreed to restart the flour rations, but not on a person-by-person basis. Instead, all surviving prisoners would have to self-organize into brigades of 150. Each brigade would have a leader, and that man would be responsible for distributing the flour. Were a minority of violent criminals and outright sociopaths. Seeing the key to their survival, they presented themselves to the guards as the brigade leaders. The guards just shrugged and gave them the flour. And so began the awful process of starving to death for all but a handful of the prisoners on the island. So you might now be wondering, well, why did people try to escape? Why didn't they brave the river and make a break for it? And the answer is that they did. I remember Kuznetsalnikov, the communist miner who got arrested at the market. Well, in the early days, when he still had his strength, he managed to swim across the icy water to the opposite bank and escape into the wilderness. Miraculously, he eventually found a collective farm where he was able to live out his days. But Salnikov, he was an exception. Most prisoners who braved the harsh waters of the Ob drowned, those that made them guards. From the safety of their barges, they got drunk, went on deck, and shot prisoners for fun. Other times, they would sail over, take a hunk of bread, and hurl it into a crowd, enjoying the way that the prisoners fought one another for a scrap of food. Some of them would trade these hunks of bread for sex with young female prisoners. Yet others would order the criminal elements to rip the gold teeth out of older settlers in exchange for cigarettes. Cannibal Island would have been a legendary nightmare if the guards had just dropped the prisoners and sailed away. By staying, they transformed a disaster into a deliberate massacre. On May the 25th, 1 week after the barges landed, the camp saw signs of cannibalism among the settlers. When he relayed the message to officials back in Tomsk, he was told the prisoners were degenerate and obviously cannibals by habit. Not 2 days later, another barge arrived, carrying an additional 1,000 prisoners to the island. So, did these guys come bearing any extra food? Well, what do you think? By late May, the island survivors had left their humanity far behind. The stronger prisoners had split into gangs that roamed the narrow island, terrorizing those weaker than themselves. Murder for food had become commonplace, and still, it was just not enough. As a cold June dawned in remotest Siberia, the starving survivors did the only thing they could. With all of the bodies lying around, they started eating them. From this point on, things got so gruesome that there doesn't really seem any point in us reporting them with our usual mix of stylistic flourishes and witty asides. It's much better.
It's much better just to be honest. You see, the same gag is being perpetrated yet again. The same old evil, the same old nastiness. Look, then we're never going to understand what's really at stake here. I know I'm having some sort of issue with the computer. That they need. They are going to have the technology to actually monitor everybody. So there's no
questioned by authorities over eating human flesh. His answer survives in the records. It was very simple, he said. Just like shashlik, we made skewers from willow branches, cut it, the corpse, into pieces, stuck it on the skewers, and roasted it over the campfire. I picked those who were not quite living, but not yet quite dead. It was obvious that they were about to go, that in a day or two they'd give up, so it was easier for them that way. Now, quickly, without suffering for another 2 or 3 days. But the horrors of Cannibal Island didn't just end with the eating of the dead or even the nearly dead. The Donner Party, this was not. This was madness on a deranged scale, like a painting of hell by Bruegel Younger. A 13-year-old girl from the local Ostyak population happened to go to the island to collect bark during the June chaos. She later recalled seeing a female prisoner being returned by one of the guards she'd been sleeping with for food, a man called Kostya. In her words, people caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, cut off her breasts, her muscles, everything they could eat, everything. Everything. They were hungry. They had to eat. When Kostya came back, she was alive. He tried to save her, but she had lost too much blood. It was not long after this that Feofila Bailina's parents opened the door of their hut to a 40-year-old woman who looked like she was 80 and had her legs wrapped in rags. Not long after that, they removed those rags, saw her calves had been sliced off for food. It seems that the combined effects of extreme hunger, the active sadism of the guards, and the lack of oversight created something very dark on Cannibal Island. A place where people didn't just eat each other to survive, but took a perverse pleasure from torturing them beforehand. Luckily, the suffering was so bad that not even the Soviets could ignore it. In mid-June, a month after the first barges landed, the Tomsk authorities abruptly dissolved the settlement. The surviving prisoners were evacuated to other collective farms. The guards were returned to Tomsk, and Cannibal Island was abandoned. In total, over 6,700 resettlers had spent time on the island during that horrendous month. Fewer than 2,200 of them survived. The remaining 4,500 had all perished, killed by the elements or murdered for food. By August, the summer grasses had grown so high that they completely concealed the bodies still rotting there. Only locals like Theophila Bailina had any knowledge of the nightmare that had unfolded on the island. But the story of Cannibal Island isn't quite over yet. We still have to deal with the aftermath. The fact that we know anything about all of this is due to one man. Vasily Velichko was a communist instructor who lived locally to the collective farms that stretched along the Ob above Tomsk. In July 1933, he began to hear the first rumors of the catastrophe that had befallen the Nazino farm, the whispers of cannibalism, of unparalleled suffering. Without mentioning it to his superiors, he decided to investigate. It was a hard trek, and Velichko didn't arrive on Cannibal Island until August. At first, nothing looked too out of place. There were tall summer grasses, sparse trees, and a handful of Ostyak people going about their business. It was only when Velichko stepped onto the island that he found the grass's secret, the half-eaten bodies lying out of sight. Over the next few weeks, Velichko interviewed the Ostyaks, the local villagers, anyone who would speak with him. Slowly, he began to build up a picture of what had happened, of the catastrophe Soviet neglect and bad planning had caused. That fall, Velichko submitted an 11-page report to Moscow outlining his findings. Care to guess what happened next? That's right, Velichko was fired from his job and kicked out of the party, and his report was dropped into the black hole of the state's archives. But not before a handful of officials with a sliver of humanity had read it and set certain things in motion intended to make sure another Cannibal Island never happened again. A moratorium was placed on the resettlement program, with labor camps instead being brought back for dissidents. In Tomsk, the 50 guards who'd overseen this squalid reign of terror all had their party memberships revoked and were jailed. I would love to tell you that they wound up in a gulag as bad as Cannibal Island. The sad truth is they nearly all served a mere 12 months in regular jails before being released. As for Velichko's report, it stayed lost in the archives until the collapse of the Soviet Union. It wasn't uncovered until 1994, and only then, after some Ostyaks who'd been alive at the time had started agitating for a memorial to be erected on the island. But grim as the history of Cannibal Island is, it's worth remembering that it was just one example in a decade of Soviet terror.
So when you think about it, oh my gosh, hold on. We'll check this one out too. But when you think about it, if you look at the strategies that many nations are employing, rounding up people, forcing them to work, you know, it's just so sad. I mean, that story right there just really touched me, man. The pain, people actually eating other people. I
love the beach. I love the mountains. I grew up in the mountains in North. But if you want to live in these areas in a more resilient fashion, you got to mitigate your homes. You've got to understand why we ask you to evacuate. And every day we've got to figure out how to make this country more financially resilient. A lot of people can't put their hands on $500. Therefore, they're not properly insured. They're not spending the money to mitigate, or they're moving to areas where they've never experienced a Category 4 storm. And very few people have ever experienced a Cat 4 or Cat 5 storm. I mean, we've only had 3 Cat 5s hit since 1851. Labor Day storm in 35, Andrew in 92, and Camille in 69. So, people often behave based on their past experience. But when these things happen, we learn. And what I'm afraid of is hurricane amnesia. 10 years is going to go by and we're going to forget what happened in Mexico Beach. So how do we build a culture of preparedness? FEMA tries to do it every year, but a lot of people don't pay attention to anything that we do or say when it's a blue sky day and nothing's happening. People only focus the camera on us after big events like this. And that's the frustrating part of being FEMA administrator, or the people that dedicate their lives to trying to get people to understand these hazards. So you guys help me. How do we learn from this and move forward in a more resilient fashion and stop the vicious cycle of damage and destruction, time and time again? How do we rebuild this coastline or areas that are constantly devastated by flooding to a more resilient fashion? Now, something that was very transformational that occurred last week. Congress proactively approved the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. In that, it made pre-disaster mitigation a priority. 12 testimonies. I've been crying for pre-disaster mitigation to be a priority.
Holy shit!
Congress did it, and I congratulate them.
Check this out, y'all. Sister Sandra, welcome to the show. Peace and power. I'm glad you made it. Now, we got, hold on one second. Impeachment. I want to see what's going on. It's like there's nothing even there. 2,000 people are watching this, and there's nothing even there. There's no sound. There's no nothing. Wow, this is crazy. There's a little bit of a rewind. But let me get back to this FEMA thing, because I really want you guys to understand. What the hell?
I'm Santiago, a graphic designer from
Buenos Aires. Okay, no. That's all that is. I thought that was actually some sort of video, but it's actually not a video. It's hold on one second.
folks.
After the hurricane, Puerto Ricans lost more than just their power.
My roof completely blew off when I lost everything in my house. I was homeless for a while.
How much help did you get from FEMA?
Not a lot.
That seems to be a theme.
Necesitamos más ayuda de federal. Más ayuda de FEMA.
It's the Hurricane Maria shot?
Hurricane Maria shot.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to need FEMA.
Then I'm going to show up.
And it's not just that FEMA did.
Do you hear the joke? Now, you just heard the one FEMA guy. Oh, we got to be all about preparedness and readiness. But then when people actually need FEMA to really be there, oh, they're not existent. So what is FEMA's ultimate goal? When are they really going to show up? When are they really going to be there? Could it be when it's time to actually open up the American-style work camps? That's when all these organizations will work together to ensure compliance. Now, the problem here is that we just don't get it, seems like. We don't get the fact that this whole thing is headed for a cataclysm. Seize the gun, seize the power, seize it all. And as we sit here being subjected to all kinds of biological weaponry, I mean, please just do a rudimentary Google search and start tracking this new virus. They're saying it's already mutated. I believe there's already one case now in the state of Washington in the United States of America. So everything's ready to rock and roll. All right. Because FEMA might not show up in Puerto Rico, but it will show up in your neck of the woods. You best believe that. Now we have all kinds of hold on. I need Listen to this.
Well, we have a Fox News alert for you, though. We're going to talk more about the Texas residents bracing for the strongest hurricane to hit the state in more than a decade. As Hurricane Harvey gains strength in the Gulf of Mexico, state and local officials warning people to evacuate today while there's still time to get out.
I am not going to send a boat down there after we ask you to leave. I'm not going to put one of my deputies in the line to go down there and get you out.
Joining us. Since we just heard the sheriff mention it, we spoke with the...
I'm sorry. This is not what I was wanting. I was wanting something totally different. Hold on. Let me...
So we are in Houston, Texas, just outside of Houston, Beaumont, Texas, and on the Big Church Night Out, and our arena that we're playing happens to be across the street from some folks that are FEMA workers that have been here for Hurricane Harvey since Hurricane Harvey, and we just thought, maybe it would be really cool to make sure that they knew how much we appreciate it, and so we're going to go over and just play some songs, just hang out and see what God has in store. I gotta get out. Most of it. The big dance, and I've been doing the church services, right? So, yeah. Oh, there you go.
Hold on.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
I'm having a little problem here. FEMA will not touch. What the heck? Hold on. This is all kinds of craziness is going on here. All right.
Folks.
This Friday, don't miss The Gentleman.
It's beautiful cinema.
Matthew McConaughey is at his brilliant best.
When the lion's hungry, he eats.
Charlie Hunnam gives the performance.
All right. Hold on, yeah.
Workshops and meetings over the past 15 days, maybe over 4 since May 7th, with 2 more to go this week. In partnership and working diligently with the governor. He actually called me on Friday and said, hey, you need some help, we're here. With FEMA, with GOSEP, all of those agencies, with the National Guard, with the Marines. I mean, we are definitely talking, and they are willing and ready to assist the city of New Orleans should disaster strike. But what we also have to be mindful of, and this is coming from FEMA, is that FEMA will not touch us until hour 72. So that's 72 hours after an event. And that means that locally, we have to be not only more proactive, but responsive to the needs of our citizens as it relates to commodities even. It's something that we're very much concerned about. But we know from FEMA that they said, listen, hour 72.
Hold on. I wonder if Homegirl is really signing for real. I'm not trying to be ignorant, but hold on. I want to back up. I want you guys, don't listen to the chick. Look at Homegirl throwing up the signs.
Is that FEMA will not touch us until hour 72. So that's 72 hours after an event. And that means that locally, we have to be not only more proactive, but responsive to the needs of our citizens as it relates to commodities even. It's something that we're very much concerned about. But we know from FEMA that they said, listen, hour 72 is when you can expect us, not before 72 hours. And so we're taking heed to that. They're also in their workshops and in the meetings, they're stressing that we encourage our residents to have, insurance, homeowners insurance. And what I said in those meetings, but what about our renters? Because we have majority renters in our city. And so they're saying, well, you know what? Push them to get rental insurance. So what we're seeing really at the federal level, that they're willing to help us and they're ready to. But the immediate response will be on the city of New Orleans and our local partners. And so I'm leaning heavy. And I feel very confident in the support that we will get and we are getting for the citizens of New Orleans.
We have time for 2, maybe 3 more questions.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not buying that.
Hey, do you want to know why?
I'm not buying that. That was actually real. I mean, there was something about that sign language that just was off to me. Now, here's something that could be a little bit interesting.
If you're serious about your business, you need to build a system.
Yeah, you got to build a system if you're serious about your business. System of control.
With you. Need one. With you. Up, get up. On top of your head. Put your hands on top of your head. I got it. What do you want in the back?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense, but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice. Some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice for all.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
Is in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense, but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice for all.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too in their own affairs. That order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
You see, we got a bunch of them down there. Shit. Ooh.
Well,
Man, look, that's probably what it was. They're on the
heard
ground.
that.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense, but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial, during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice for all.
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs. The order and progress can only come when individuals surrender to an all-powerful sovereign.
And on that, my friends, I ask you, are you willing to surrender your rights to an all-powerful sovereign? Are you truly that small-minded? I sincerely hope that today's show has given you something to think about, something to reflect on, perhaps even do your own research today. So as always, live your life of integrity without hate, envy, or greed. Brothers and sisters, please, 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 let's try to be kinder to one another. Peace and power, unity and victory, dignity and respect, liberation. I'm out.